All right. Welcome everyone.
All right.
Cole, how you doing?
Good. How about yourself?
Doing well, doing well. I'm happy we got around to doing this. That's my water bottle. We met at this point, what, like 2 weeks ago?
Yeah, something like that.
3 weeks
right.
ago in
3
Pi
weeks. Valhalla.
at this epic birthday party at Valhalla,
Mm-hmm.
hanging on some hammocks, having some good conversation.
Yep. Would recommend if you're ever in Pi.
Yeah, definitely. The guy there, the owner, is super nice.
Yeah.
And then we've run into each other since a few times, hung out a bit.
Yep.
And yeah, I think you've got a cool story of how you ended up out here
Oh, thanks.
and what the things you're thinking about these days.
Yeah, I like to think, probably too much a little bit, but
Can relate to that.
yeah. So I think you wanted to start with just like how did I unplug from the default reality and start doing this instead,
Yeah,
whatever this is. So
I think that could be a good place to start.
yeah, well, I mean, it's a little hard because like I don't know, maybe this is relatable, but like for me, I always wanted to travel. Like I knew from I remember there was a time like in sixth grade when my teacher, Mr. Burbridge, taught us that peasants lived and died within 10 miles of where they were born. And I was like,
I don't want to be a peasant.
it's not me. Like, oh shit, no. Like, because I was looking, it's like my parents were still living in the same city they were born in.
Yeah.
And that's where I was growing up. I was just like, no, like, all the advantages of the 21st century, and I'm still a peasant.
Nothing wrong with being a peasant per se.
Sure.
My grandparents were peasants.
Sure.
Good values, good stuff, but
Backbone of the world.
But we have potential
historically. Yeah.
these days to do more, right?
Whatever we want, pretty much. Yeah. So, anyway, that was the beginning of it. I always knew I wanted to travel, and then in freshman year, it turned into this dream where I was gonna like save up a lot and like buy a property and rent the property and like use that money to buy.
When were you thinking
property.
this? Which grade?
Freshman year of high school.
Oh, freshman year. I was like, wow, you were thinking about this in grade school? Okay.
No, not quite. But so I was like, yeah, buy a property, rent a property, buy those. And once I get like 10 properties, like then I'll be making $70,000 a year, and I can just like go on forever. And then I went to school, went to college, studied mechanical engineering, kind of to that degree of like make money. But then graduated with like $60,000 of student loans. So a lot of people end up in that hole, especially I think in America, and that's definitely a hole I ended up in for like 6 years while I was trying to work and pay off the student loans. And I was lucky enough, I had some help from my parents with that at some point, but like my loan payments were it was like $700 a month was like the minimum loan payment. So it's just like had to get out from under that before I could start saving.
Yeah.
And then to me, like the one, because I had kind of, it was like, this is an old dream, to travel from when I was a kid, and I was like kind of on the verge of like giving up.
But you never like traveled like with your parents growing up, or like?
Not really. Like we had done, my family did some like family reunions on like a cruise, right? And so I don't know that I would call that traveling, right? I don't want to sound like too pretentious or anything, but it's just like, I would say it's a different thing from traveling.
Absolutely.
Right? Like, and you're only, when you get to a place, Puerto Vallarta, right? Like, you're there for 6 hours before it's back on the boat, right? Like, you don't even get to spend the night. You have no idea what nightlife is. Like, there's no time or chance to integrate, like, with the natives.
So just this idea of travel can mean so many different things to so many different people.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And
but you didn't give up, and by the 6 years that it took you to pay it off,
so the
you
fifth year,
still hung on to this.
The 5th year, what happened is I was basically, it had been paid off, and I was invited. Some of my friends were gonna go backpack the Alps, fly into Munich, and then walk from Munich over the Alps to Venice, right? And this is takes about a month, right? I think it's 35 days or something like that when it's all planned out and everything.
That sounds amazing.
It sounded amazing. I was like, wait, this is what I want. This is the dream. And so, and I was in a technical sales job, adjacent to the construction industry. And so everything was timelines and schedules, and there's always something coming down the pipeline, and you're working on 100 projects a day. And maybe that's an exaggeration, but several projects a day, hundreds of projects, throughout a month, right?
Yeah.
And I was like, hey, do you guys think that maybe I could take a month off to go do this thing? And they just laughed at me. And so I was just okay, so now I'm going to quit this job, no matter what. I can't go on this trip.
I'm glad that was your reaction, and not the I'll just wait on this trip.
Yeah, no, it was.
Well, there's no waiting, right? Because your friends are going.
The trip happened. They went without me.
Oh, they did.
Yeah, and so, but I was just this is never gonna happen again. There's no way I'm gonna let this happen again. At this point, I've gotten out of debt, right? And so it was just I didn't have any funds to go do anything with, but I didn't have any obligations keeping me there, and then and for me that was a whole other thing. It's because through this whole time, the desire to eventually travel was sabotaging all of my emotional relationships, right? I wouldn't let anybody get close enough to me that settling down with them could be preferable to traveling, right? It was no, I've decided I'm going to go travel.
Or you could use it as a filter.
Possibly, but it always seems to me that it would be much more likely that I would meet somebody
while traveling
that would pass my filters while traveling, while doing the thing, rather than meet somebody who's stagnant like me.
Yeah, that's a probability.
And then,
the probability for sure.
That, that we both want to, we believe we want to do the same thing, and we both actually want to do the same thing, and then we actually do the same thing.
Yeah.
There's a lot of, I don't know, it's probably not, but yeah. So I saved up spent about a year saving up, and then put in my 2 weeks in the beginning of August 2019. So mid-August was my last day of work. So then I went out to Burning Man for Build Week and helped my camp build, which was an amazing experience. I mean, for anybody who has been to Burning Man but hasn't been to Build Week, I highly recommend.
So if you do Build Week and then the full Burning Man, what's the total time commitment? Is it 3 weeks?
So Build Week only lasts a week, right? So it's the week before, so it could be up to 2 weeks. I went out the Wednesday of Build Week, right? And then Burning Man's a week, so that's
it's about 2 weeks. Okay.
Yeah, and I mean, it's a little more than a week and a half. I think that was, but then I stayed a couple days after Burning Man as well to help my camp tear it down. I was the last person to leave my camp this year, and then we got a perfect MOOP score, which was nice.
What's that?
Well, MOOP is matter out of place, right?
Oh, I see. That's how they evaluate.
Yeah. So after everybody leaves, then the organization crawls over the entire city, right? And like, oh, we found a bit of styrofoam. Like, who camped here?
Yeah, you get docked.
Yeah, and you get in trouble for, there's glitter here. There's some styrofoam. Oh, there's like a bit of astroturf, and you get in trouble. And then basically, I mean, there's, I don't know. I could be more plugged into it. It affects a whole bunch of things. It's kind of like a name and shame thing at some level, but at another level, I know it also affects like your placement. So if your camp wants to be placed like closer to the center of Burning Man, like more prominent areas, but your MOOP scores are bad, you leave every year and there's just like shit, right? You're not going to get that good placement next year. Like the next year, they're going to send you out, you're in the back where nobody's going to come see you. So so we got a great MOOP score. Yeah.
It's a good self-esteem builder.
Yeah. And I was out there for 13 days total, but it's just, it's amazing. Like by the end of it, I had this I don't know, it's kind of like pseudo-biblical, pseudo-psychedelic, little trip, but it just, like ashes to ashes, dust to dust, right? Like part in the Bible. Well, so it's like, I mean, the whole playa is dust. Like that's all it is. And when we got out there, I mean, they've been building the city for a month, but that's basically just like roads and porta potties and center camp and the man. But so by the time we got out there, there's not very much, right? There's whole city blocks where there's nothing but a shipping container sitting there waiting for its camp to come and, pull all of the life out of it and set it up. And by the time we left, by like Monday evening, right? Like there's nothing there, right? And so it's just like this, as I was leaving, or the last morning, I just had this like dust to dust, like we built
ashes, dust to dust.
Yeah,
I like that.
There was that, and then the kind of the anthem, like my personal anthem this last year was like, we built this city on rock and roll.
Yeah.
So it's
solid,
like this, we built this city from dust to dust, on rock and roll. It's like, yes, I don't know. Felt cool.
It's a good way. I feel like Burning Man is a great way to start, kick off.
Yeah.
This, yeah, because that in and of itself is such an incredible experience for so many different people.
Right. That was, so it was a great way, because then I had like this whole extra level of freedom at Burning Man that was completely new, which is like, I don't have a default to get back to. Like, I don't have a job waiting for me. I don't have to do anything on Monday. Oh, I guess I'll stay an extra day. I hear there's some cool stuff Monday evening. Like, okay, yeah, let's do that. So that was really cool. And I came back from Burning Man, hung out, family and friends for about a week or two, and then flew out September 11th to Japan, and that's where I started this journey. So,
cheaper airplane tickets on September 11th, huh?
A little bit, yeah.
So you went straight to Japan.
Yep.
How long were you in Japan?
It's 3 weeks, slightly more than 3 weeks. Highly recommend. It's but it's like California expensive. So
yeah.
I got there and I was like, I've heard Japan's very expensive, but it's normal. But then I kept traveling and I realized everything that I knew as a Californian is very expensive. So that's one of the,
It's nice. It's nice to have it be that way. We were, my partner and I were considering basically either Japan or Thailand this is around February, March,
right,
when COVID was coming down, and we're like, well, we don't want to go home yet,
right,
but we should think about where we want to shelter in place or prepare to shelter in place. And it was between Japan and Thailand, and we made the call based on expenses.
Yeah, 100%. That's the.
Yeah.
I mean, if
even though we had
money
like a
was
place to
no.
stay in Japan,
Uh-huh.
even with that, it's like
Right. It's,
night and day difference expense wise.
yeah.
Yeah. And that's a big thing. Like, I'm sure you were learning all those lessons about like frugality and like what to spend your money on and like how you want to travel and all that.
Wish I didn't spend my money on that. Yeah. Yeah. All those lessons.
After Japan, you went to, was it Hong Kong?
I went to Seoul for 4 days, and then I went to Taiwan for 4 days, to Taipei.
I love Taiwan, man. I want to go back there.
I love Taiwan too. Yeah, Taiwan's amazing.
Super affordable, right? Still, I went in 2009.
It's
for a week.
I mean, not Thailand affordable, but like definitely compared to Japan.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's a little more expensive than Southeast Asia, but it's not like Japan or Korea expensive. So
when I went there in 2009, I could not believe how affordable it was.
Yeah.
It was like a week-long trip with my university. They were trying to get us to study abroad. We went to 2 universities in Taiwan and 2 universities in Hong Kong, and that was my first time in Asia. And I couldn't believe how cheap Taipei was. You can get like a whole meal for like $2, and like even like one semester of housing was like $1,500 if I remember correctly, somewhere in one of the universities.
Yeah.
And it was just like, it was mind-boggling to me because in Illinois, in the middle of nowhere, in the cornfields, not a metropolitan city, it was 5-6x that.
Yeah, it's dollars. Like when you're running on dollars, it needs to be more expensive because dollars are worth more.
Well, and going back to the administration stuff we were talking about with universities, right? Like there's a business because you can get an apartment way cheaper on these college campuses.
That was one of the ones I was surprised to find with Japan, and the like affordability was like, from asking around, it seemed like if you had a job in Japan wasn't that expensive. It's only if you go to Japan on savings from another country that Japan is like a very expensive place. But like I remember asking like, how much do you make doing this job, and like how much is your rent, right? And coming from like San Francisco, Oakland area, I was like blown away. Like, you're only spending 25% of your income on rent. Like, oh my God, it's so amazing.
Well, I read that housing is super affordable in most places in Japan because they specifically targeted that. There's a really good Economist article on like nations that basically like decided to go the route of real estate appreciating and thus being an investment vehicle versus nations, surprisingly like Japan, that made a different decision, which is like housing should be affordable. And in some cases, if not most cases, it's actually depreciating over time, which you can see through the guise of like, well, the building's deteriorating. But yeah, I always thought that was super fascinating. Like, yeah, Japan's real estate is actually way more affordable, especially compared to, like you said, to wages.
Yeah. Well, I'm not 100% sure on the specifics here. I don't want to say wrong things, but there's something along like Japan went through like a deflationary crisis around 2008. I think a little bit after 2008, and as well as before that, they hit negative interest rates before anybody. And
I think it might have even been before the Great Recession.
I think the first time it was, but there was some pretty intense changes to the structure happening around the Great Recession time. But so that's a deflationary case as opposed to an inflationary case, right? Like where people aren't buying things, right? Like people would rather save their money, right? And so like because nobody's buying anything, the prices of everything go down, and that, you know, goes over into housing, right? And whether they've done that by design, which it sounds like they have, but that's news to me, or it's just one of the aspects of, you know, the particular like financial atmosphere and climate that they're in.
I think it totally can be tied to other things. For what it's worth, that that bit was, I said earlier that it might have been from The Economist, but I think I'm maybe part of it was from The Economist, but part of it was from Reddit. It was this like highly upvoted post from some guy who was trying to explain this phenomenon. But yeah, like everything we say, like, should fact check it for yourself.
Yeah.
Like, yeah. But the deflationary thing, I know for a fact, like,
and to
happened.
that extent, like, there's a lot of fear that about like the Japanification of the states, right? Like, which is essentially just like some deflationary shit hitting the fan in the states, right? Everybody's expecting, like, as the Fed is printing this money, that it's going to inflate, but it's very possible that it could go the other way, because unemployment is the highest it's ever been. Like, it touched the highest it's ever been and then came back down. But unemployment is super high. That's deflationary. There, people all around, like countries like Japan and Europe, they're borrowing trillions of dollars, right? Like, that's deflationary. So we might
basically stagflation, right? Like, we went through that in the 70s.
Yeah,
it's basically like the inflation is increasing, but the economic output is stagnant, and it happens when there's high unemployment,
right?
Like you're saying,
right? So that's one of the possible, I think very possible futures for the states, like for this next. I don't know if you listen to Ray Dalio, he's like the biggest hedge fund manager in the world.
It's got a good book called Principles.
Yeah, great book.
Which I read through, both as like personal principles and like business work principles that he applied at Bridgewater.
Yeah, he's got a bunch of stuff on, a bunch of ideas, right, on how the world is changing, the climate's changing, China's a rising power. The U.S. has this huge giant debt, and every time we run into problems, we borrow from our future selves to try to reinflate the bubble to keep it going.
And take advantage of the fact that we can print more, with the dollar being the reserve currency.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is a privilege that we might be losing.
Right, and also something I think the vast majority of Americans don't appreciate. Like, I think I don't entirely understand it, but I think the vast majority of Americans don't understand it and don't appreciate it. And then once, if it gets to the point where America is no longer the reserve currency, it's a little hard to imagine now, but it's not impossible. That's going to be like a painful shock to a lot of people who like just thought this is the way things are, and now it's, oh no, this is the way things are. Like, so, but yeah.
I mean, all this stuff is like, it's super complex. There's many variables. There's lots of opinion and perspective out there, and there's a lot of it that like easily goes into the conspiratorial views.
Yeah.
And it's just like figuring out like how much you want to learn about this and like where you want to be, and like, but in my experience, like, super important to be very like critical, like apply critical thinking, and like realize that there's motives behind a lot of these like opinions out there, for sure. But and a lot of people that are working full-time jobs that are like in this world that like, you know, you work so hard and diligently to get out of, it's like you don't have as much time to pursue these like natural interests.
Yeah, that's,
or just like curiosity and kind of like learning about the world. And also being outside of the US, it's like it gives you this incredible perspective and you meet a lot of people that have different perspectives.
yeah.
Do you feel like that accelerated a lot of this stuff for you? Either the time or the people that you were exposed to?
I think the time is definitely, it is definitely, yeah. I mean, I think in both cases, like it's definitely something that's like expanded my, you know, my ability to like come up with new models, more interesting, more complicated models, like correct old models, right? Yeah, from traveling a bit, you know, I'm starting to realize, you know, the world doesn't work exactly the way I thought it did, right? Like that's always useful, right? When there's something as big as the world not working the way that you think, right? Like correct your ideas.
It's very humbling.
Yeah, super humbling.
It's super humbling for me.
Um,
You think you know.
Don't know shit.
Don't know shit.
Yep. Or, yeah, I mean, like I spent some time in Hong Kong, spent some time in Taiwan, right? Like I've met people from Tibet here in Thailand. You know, I mean, these are all places where there's like some very serious political headwinds blowing out of China that, yeah, I don't know, it just really like gives perspective to me to, you know, like all the things I thought were issues like back home, right? Like how big of a deal is this, right? Like what can we do? Should we do? Like how much outrage does this, you know, is the appropriate amount for this gaffe? Like I don't know. It's just like, oh, there's still some real, I don't know, like it seems like, especially, and this is another thing, and it just kind of combines it, like goes back to Ray Dalio, it goes to this Chinese headwinds, it goes to how does the world work, but like we're headed for a time soon, I think the next year or two, maybe 3, but the next few years, when like the world is going to change very quickly. Like, I mean, it already is. Everything's kind of like the nature of technology is like the world is changing faster today than it's ever changed before, right? And tomorrow it's going to be a little bit faster, and the next day it's going to be a little bit faster. But
yeah, it's like there's no doubt in my mind that it's accelerating. Mm-hmm. And then if you want to get like even nerdier about it, it's like, what's the next derivative? What's the derivative after acceleration? Yeah. Like, is that accelerating?
The rate of change of the acceleration?
Yeah.
I would say it is.
That is,
you know,
that's where I think it can get way more interesting and also way more scary.
Right.
To think that, yeah, I mean that and if you throw artificial intelligence into this,
right, and so
that's where like it can change in us. I mean, I still think we're a ways from that. I finished reading Life 3.0 and I've been following along like roughly with the research, mm-hmm. And I think at this point the projections are like 5 to 20 years. I don't know, don't quote me on that, but like something like that. Like it's closer than we think, but not like tomorrow, thank goodness, because I don't think we're ready for that at all.
No. But also, I don't know, I have this idea about like AGI. I think we're a lot farther off than we think we are.
I honestly hope so.
I hope so too.
I think it's a preparedness thing, right? Like,
yeah.
And it's going to start with things like deep fakes.
Sure,
and
sure.
like,
I mean, but that's
and like manipulation on social media, which we're seeing. Like, we're already seeing the effects of social media, or sorry, of artificial intelligence, applied artificial intelligence.
But this is machine learning. Like, this isn't artificial general intelligence. I think.
Sure.
I think artificial general intelligence is going to require quantum processors.
You think it will?
Yeah. Like, I think our brain is a quantum computer, not a binary computer. And so if we're actually, and I think that's what's going to keep AGI off our backs for a while. Granted,
have you been following quantum computing? There's like supposedly some, I think it's, from what I've heard, it's fairly primitive and like experimental still. Mm-hmm. But like IBM's working on quantum computers. Sure. Like there's like,
Deep Blue. Google's got one. I mean, they're great, but the difference is I think our brain is a room temperature supercomputer, like where the we have these different types of neurons. There's this one called a pyramidal neuron. They make up less than 9% of the neurons in our brain, but they exist mostly in the prefrontal cortex. I think there's a couple other places they have them. And these are filled with microtubules. The surface of the microtubules, according to this model, that's where the actual like qubits would be, right? Like the entangled quantum bits. And the way that structure is packed, I forget, it was like hundreds or thousands of quantum bits of qubits can be entangled with each other in chains before it reaches the limit where the system has to collapse, right? Where the quantum entangled system has to collapse to one of the superpositions. And this idea is kind of that collapsing of quantum uncertainty to a certainty is consciousness. Like that wherever that happens, there is consciousness. And so that there'd be, like in the, I don't know, in a beam of light, there is a kind of consciousness involved in it, right? And that gets to this, like, if you stop thinking about it like a scientist, right, and think about it like Pocahontas, right? Like everything is alive, like the trees and the leaves and the wind and the rocks, like it's all living, it's just like it does it in a different way.
Something that pagan like faiths and mythologies basically like figured out or whatever, believed thousands of years ago. Mm-hmm. And it's like we might be coming full circle to that.
Yeah, I think so in a lot of ways.
What do you recommend for folks? I like this book called Alice in Quantum Land. It's like the story of Alice in Wonderland, but like told through like basically introducing a lot of the quantum principles.
Okay.
That you had mentioned.
Yeah.
I think that could be a really cool resource for people that don't have as much background in science or engineering.
I like that because it's like a natural extension off of like what C.S. Lewis was a mathematician. Was it C.S. Lewis? No. Carroll?
I don't think it was C.S. Lewis.
It was something Carroll. Anyway.
That wrote Alice in Wonderland.
The guy who wrote Alice in Wonderland.
Or the guy.
It was a guy. Yeah. I'm pretty sure. It was a mathematician. And so that's like part of why Alice in Wonderland is like such a weird fucking place, is because it's like, what if time ran backwards? Like, what if this, all these weird,
all the good questions to ask.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I like that. That's a natural extension. The theory of quantum consciousness, I was just talking about, that's not mine. It's this guy Stuart Hameroff. So you can find his videos on YouTube.
What's it called?
Stuart Hameroff.
And
Quantum Consciousness.
Quantum Consciousness.
Yeah. So he's got, he's done a lot of work. He's got a lot of stuff. It was one of those things to me where I was like, I don't know that anything he's saying is wrong, right? Like, I can't point at anything that's wrong. Some of the claims seem pretty crazy.
Yeah.
But it actually, like, it fits into everything else I know, and it proposes some stuff about a space that nobody knows. And whether or not those kinds of ideas end up being right? They're the kinds of ideas that always interest me. Right?
Yep.
Like, hey, here's this thing, nobody knows how it works. I've got this idea, maybe it works this way. Like, I love that shit. It's the best. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's like 1 foot in like grounded stuff and you've studied or whatever. And then oftentimes it's like they're tying concepts together, or they're stepping more into the theoretical side. Yeah, where I think it gets really interesting.
Yep.
Yeah, I'll try to put these resources in the comments so folks can follow along. Thank you, Carla, for lending me Alice in Quantum Land. I actually think I still have it. Yeah, sharing this stuff with folks is always fun. But yeah, I had never heard of that before. So
yeah,
we might have these neurons that like.
No, we do have these neurons
that may behave.
That may have quantum computing capacity within them.
Yeah.
And so like the inputs and outputs of these neurons may look digital, but the processing might actually be much more complex. Yeah.
I wonder how this relates to the idea of like shared consciousness or like reality being a manifestation of a shared consciousness.
Well, so to me, the way that would work is I imagine, so like there's a couple of different like theories of everything that people have been trying to put forward recently. So there's like Stephen Wolfram has one that's based on computing. And then Eric Weinstein has one that's more complicated. Well, I don't know, more complicated, but it's definitely more complicated to describe. I can't just say it's based on computing. It's so he thinks that there's like a 4D world that runs on Newtonian physics, right? So 3 spatial dimensions and 1 dimension of time.
Yep.
And it runs on Newtonian physics, right? Which is gravity, friction, adding heat to phase change, stuff like this. And that there are 10 higher dimensions of measurement space, because this is based in gauge theory.
What's gauge theory?
Gauge theory is kind of complicated, but it's like,
how would you?
It's basically like if
ELI
we wanted,
10 or ELI 5. Explain like I'm 5 or 10 from Reddit.
If we want to look at something, everything's connected, right? And so if we want to look at anything with any kind of like reasonable ability to understand it, we've got to like make a box, put the box around what we're looking at, and then focus on what's in the box, right? Except if you just do a box, right, and like put a box on the world, right, like that's not quite, like that's a little bit too oversimplified.
Yeah.
You have to also look at
it's just like theory of constraints.
Well, it's not theory of constraints, but it's theory of it's like theory of changes, right? So it's like you put the box on what you're looking at, and then like the field might change so that this shifts. And as this side over here shifts, everything in the box needs to shift appropriately, right? So you have to measure both the box as well as look at what's inside the box, right? And so, like, because the gauge theory is important for like the stock market, and it's important for mapping the world, because the world's not actually like a perfect sphere, right? It's kind of lumpy a little bit.
Is this related? Places. Is this related to like the idea that the observer influences the measurement, or in this case, the way you observe influences it?
I think it could be if the box is small enough, if you're looking at a quantum event, but I would say for the most part, no. Like usually with gauge theory, you're looking at much larger things.
Gotcha.
As far as I understand it, and that observer effect it's purely something that happens in quantum.
Gotcha.
Yeah, in the quantum.
So you're going back. You were explaining Weinstein's unifying theory that uses gauge theory.
Right. So there's a four-dimensional Newtonian universe, and then perpendicular to that, there's 10 dimensions of measurement space, right? And all of the interesting stuff that's like non-Newtonian, right? So like relativistic velocity, right? Like how if you start traveling near the speed of light, time is going to change for you, right? All of that kind of stuff is contained not in the four-dimensional universe, but in the time and measurement perpendicular dimensions, right? So there, like this does like a couple weird things where all of the stuff is in the four-dimensional world, but there is this very real perpendicular sets of strings of energy, right, that are giving information, like additional information to the world about how it should behave, right? And so, but it's like these are actually two worlds, right? And where we are, it's just like the intersection of them, right?
It's like a cross section.
Yeah, it's like a cross section.
Like two-dimensional beings in a three-dimensional world can only see a cross section of what we can in their world. So if we live in 3 dimensions, and so the fourth dimension is time, so then we see cross sections of time, which we call the present.
Right.
Then this other, like these other dimensions that you're talking about, like we're just experiencing cross sections of them.
Right.
To different degrees.
Right.
Like they influence our world, but like, and we can like theoretically think of them, but they're so out of grasp of our minds and our conditioning, right?
Right. It's you could do some like symbolic representation, but it's going to be very hard to imagine, because it's not even. It seems, if I remember right, it's not even that like fermions and bosons come down this. It's that we have fermions and bosons here. They're part of the four-dimensional Newtonian space, but that the way the energy is coming down these 10-dimensional measurement strings, that tells the fermions and bosons which way to dance, right? Like what vibration, what spin, like what are we doing? And that makes them special, right? That turns this fermion into, like the specific fermion that carries electromagnetism, right? Like it turns this boson into this, the specific one that carries.
And you're saying this energy comes from the higher dimensions?
Well, so I mean, like everything is energy, right? Like E equals MC squared, right? Granted, that's an oversimplified version of this. I'm sorry. Like these are other people's ideas that I'm trying to explain, so I'm like mixing some metaphors and stuff. Yeah, but basically everything's energy dancing in different forms, right? And
the hippies definitely believe that.
Well, I mean, so do the scientists. Like,
We have a lot more in common than we think.
That's true.
We just call things differently.
Yep.
And think of things differently.
Yep.
Or think we do.
Get to the conclusions differently. But like I had like one of my out there ideas was like, what if there could be consciousnesses in the 10-dimensional measurement space, right? Like, what would that be like? Because then they have this different vantage to reality than we do, right? So we're like, that's a lot like the 3D people looking at the 2D people. It's the 10D people looking at the 4D people.
So maybe this is what I mean, like one of the paradigms of looking at like deities of sorts, or God, or whatever you want to call it, like omnipotent, right, all powerful, omniscient, all knowing, and ubiquitous, everywhere at once, right? This is one of the models I learned in high school from Mr. Robin. Hey, Mr. Robin, if you're watching. But yeah, so maybe if you're looking at it, or maybe like that's what kind of explains that, right? Like if you're a being that is like either like present in this higher dimension, who knows how you got there, who knows if we can get there. I mean, some people think we can through, enlightenment or meditation or whatever. Then these are the types of things that, again, seem kind of unimaginable for us, right? Like imagine knowing everything, or imagine being everywhere at once.
Yeah.
But like literally, if you go through these models of the 10 dimensions, like time, like the 4th dimension is like time is a line. The 5th dimension, like it all eventually goes back to a point.
Yeah, but this is a different 10 dimensions than that, because you're thinking of 10 spatial dimensions, right? So that's actually very interesting, because like all of Weinstein's theory is based on a single timeline, right? So like if there are multiple timelines, right?
Yeah. That
would be like a whole nother set on top of what he's talking about. Because the 10 dimensions...
I thought, so the model of 10 dimensions that I had looked into and learned about,
right,
it counts for different timelines.
Right, exactly. This does not.
Yeah, this does not.
Yeah.
So I guess how would you, if you had to put a label on it, what do you call this theory of the 10 dimensions? If not spatial 10 dimensions.
Gauge theory.
This is the gauge theory.
Yeah. Because what happens is you have 3 spatial points, right, and 1 time point, right? So then what you need to do is you need to measure the length of each of them.
Yeah.
Right. So that's 4 like rulers, right? And then you need to be able to measure the angles between all of them, right? So that turns out to be 6 protractors, right? So you need 4 rulers and 6 protractors. That's 10 dimensions.
Interesting.
Right? Like it's not like that's why I say like it's measurement dimensions, right? Like it's not like turn left now. Say turn the secret 5th dimensional left inside of the left. Like it's not like that. It's just like a different set of variations. And he simplifies it by saying like we're familiar with a lot more dimensions than it's like color could be a dimension, right? Like taste could be a dimension, right? Like you think of something as like salty. It's 1 dimension, sweet is a dimension, like savory is a dimension, sour is a dimension, right? So now we can talk about, like
I'll have to check this out.
things on your tongue, right, in the spatial dimensions.
Yeah.
And like what do they taste like in the taste dimensions? We can speak of like higher dimensional, but it's like a very mathematical way to talk about dimensions.
How have you applied any of this stuff in your day-to-day life, if at all? Or like, how have you seen yourself think or approach day-to-day life differently, if at all? That's a question I find myself asking myself a lot, because it's so fun for me to get into this like more abstract thinking space.
Yeah. I really like the abstract thinking space, but one of the ones that's actually like, it's kind of like been more, I don't know, it's, so like, I think maybe I could do more. One of the ones is like, I've got a book I want to write, you know, and I have had an idea to start a podcast, you know, or something similar.
We can do that.
We have the technology. But I haven't. So like in terms of actuality, how has this kind of stuff affected me? There's two ways. One of them is just like kind of a, you know, shitty, like egotistical way. So like one of the things I recognize about myself and like what I value at some point in this last year is like, it's at some level, it's important to me to know things that people don't know, that like I can be the one to share with somebody like new things.
Interesting.
Right? Like, and so this is some good ammo for that, right? Like, but it really doesn't do anything except like give me this particular kind of like feeling like, okay, cool, you did it. You know, like you got your little hit of dopamine for the day. The other one is that it, I feel like there's, so I mean, like we've talked about a couple. So there's like Stuart Hameroff with his like quantum consciousness. There's Eric Weinstein and his potential theory of everything. There's like a unified gauge field theory of everything. And there's, we haven't talked about Graham Hancock, but like anybody who watches Joe Rogan would be, you know, or listens to Joe Rogan might be familiar with Graham Hancock, but he's, along with Randall Carlson, they have a lot of stuff on like ancient history and, you know, potentially like ancient civilizations that were destroyed when Earth was hit by a bunch of asteroids at the end of the Younger Dryas period, like 12,800 to 11,600 years ago, that ended the last ice age and started 400 feet of sea level rise at some point between then and now. So the thing about that is, I feel
like that's a podcast in and of itself.
I know.
Is this where we invite people to write in the comments if they're interested in that? Because we've had this conversation over the course of 2 or 3 hours already, that's true. I feel like we still just scratched the surface of it.
There's a lot. So just, I mean, real quick, because just to fully elaborate what I think so impactful about that is humans have been around like 200,000 years.
Yeah.
But this is only 12,000 years ago, right? Like the oldest stuff we know about, you know, like cities, you know, civilizations is like 10, 12,000 years, right? We don't know anything really past that.
We don't know if they were playing Settlers of Catan back then. We don't know if we just like rediscovered the game there.
Yeah.
Maybe they were probably doing that in real life. That was life.
But
do you want some sheep coal?
Is this the Seafarers version where I can use a sheep to build boats?
Sure.
Okay. Yeah.
I haven't played Seafarers. I'm not at that level of evolution in my technology.
Much more interested in especially if this is like the kind where
Knights and Kings.
Well, I haven't played Knights and Kings. No.
My friends rave about that.
Standard in the Seafarers. Giving sheep another use is key. It really like helps balance the resources.
I think so.
Yeah.
At times.
They're not really good for much else otherwise. But sea level was 400 feet lower. It was an ice age. I think everybody would have been living on the coast, like trying to keep warm, from like the ocean currents. Right? Sheep. And
wool is very good.
And then catastrophic sea level rise. Even if it was like 20, 30 feet of sea level rise overnight, and the rest came over the course of thousands of years, like that would fuck us up today, right? So anyway, so there's like these big crazy ideas where like the engineer, like the trained engineer, in me, like I might be skeptical about like this part or that part, but like I see a lot of merit to these ideas, and yet like I don't see them like adopted or taken seriously by like academic institutions or like the like any like of the scientific journals, like Nature or.
But those are inherently like lagging like. I guess some stuff like on the forefront of research, they're kind of like early adopters, but I feel like there's a lot of stuff that academia like isn't interested in or is more of like a late adopter to.
Right.
Would you agree with that?
I think, well, sure. Like money drives science, like money drives research,
yep.
Right? To a large degree. Like what those journals' primary, like research categories or like areas of interest are, I don't know, but I would imagine that a theory of everything, would be up there. Like they need to do, it's not a fully flushed out thing. So at this point, like an article on like the theory of everything would probably be like, scientists discover ice on Mars. Is this evidence for life? And it's just like, okay, here's a little bit, and you didn't actually give me anything, just stuff we already knew, and it's clickbait, So it's like I can see how they might want to wait for some, stronger evidence in some cases, but like,
yeah.
But a lot of these things, to me, it's just like, it seems like they seem like very valid hypotheses, and that they're, most people have never heard of them is like a little disheartening to me because like they.
Well, more and more people are hearing about them.
That's true.
At least that, right?
Yeah.
Like it's a start.
Right, but it's also doing this thing to me where it's like making me a little.
Is it taking away your ammo?
No, it's just like it's like I'm not sure if it like makes me trust institutions less, but I think what it is what it really does is it's like that moment when like you realize that your parents aren't actually like perfect in every way and they're just people.
I think that's a good
that's
a good comparison.
It's like, oh, the scientists don't actually know everything, like the scientific literature, is like, it's biased by this, it's like pushed, forward by that, it's like cut off in this corner. And it's like understandable why, like the whys and the hows, but at the same time, there's like just some level of like, it's like disappointing. And I wish there was, like something more than YouTube, right? Like for these,
Well, there's Gaia now.
Yeah, something more than that too.
That doesn't do it for you? You don't like the Gaia ammo?
I've seen, well, the Gaia ammo is some good ammo. Those are different conversations. Like,
yeah,
people start, hey, I heard this crazy thing, but you don't know shit about crazy. Let me tell you about what they think the ancient Sumerians were up to, like.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's I mean, I don't know. It's entertaining. Like,
I think that the case for optimism is like it starts with just getting more people aware of it, like yourself, and like spreading it to other people, and just getting people to be more curious and questioning and open-minded, which I think are in general great things.
It's a huge. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, go ahead.
Like, I feel like in terms of like like the way we teach our kids, like the way the schools teach kids, it's like too much rote memorization. It's too much like, what's the right answer? And there's not enough like critical thinking and thinking for yourself. And wait, could this be? Wait, why is that? And
what is this idea of a right answer?
Yeah.
Like, if you have enough constraints, then you can get to a place where there are right answers, but the world doesn't work like that.
Right.
Like,
well, and there's like, so there's another.
It's inherent. Like, it's like, I have my reality, you have your reality. Like, what's true for me might not be true for you. Like, just getting to that point, I think is a huge stepping stone.
Mm-hmm.
And really being able to digest it. Kind of like what we were talking about earlier. Like, I have this idea, you have this idea. They're like completely, like, they seem contradictory to us, and we can hold both of those in our minds and be comfortable with that. First, it's just like acknowledging that two ideas exist.
Mm-hmm.
Next, it's like, okay, like getting more comfortable with it.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's like trying to integrate it.
Mm-hmm.
And then also trying to spread that to people, trying to introduce other perspectives to people in such a way, especially like if it challenges their worldview, because people, in my experience, they get quite attached to the truths that they believe in or that are attached to their realities.
That's I think the number one thing is like that when your identity is attached to a specific worldview, then anything that threatens that worldview threatens your identity, right? And so if you can make the level up where your identity is no longer attached to a worldview, right? You're like, this is what I believe, but like I'm open to, new information, right? Like, oh, this thing,
or maybe
conflicts with this thing, but like they take turns being right, at the same time. Like, that's weird. How do we make sense of that?
The way I would think of it is like, maybe a way to think about it is like you're expanding your worldview, so that other worldviews can fit in it, right? Like, you see the merits. You see, the pros and the cons, the weaknesses, the strengths. You see all of that, and you're able to see for other worldviews, like the expansion, the ongoing attempt to expand one's worldview. And inherently, it's going to be limited. That's the thing. It's like built-in humility. The more you know, you don't know anything. Right? Really taking that to heart. Because if you're able to have these worldviews in your worldview, then, like, how are you going to judge people? Right? You're going to be like, well, like, they're just in that worldview.
Right.
And I see that. And
I do that a decent amount, and I get in trouble for it, though. Like, when
judging?
So it's like, and I guess it kind of makes sense, but like, I'll see people enough that I get a sense of, oh, I think I understand your worldview, right? And then I'll be like, your worldview is in my tree of models, right? The whole thing is operating under this worldview, right? The social justice warrior worldview, right? Or the MAGA worldview, like whatever, right? And so, but so to me, like that, I don't know, it primes me to be a little like elitist or arrogant, right? It's like, okay, like
Yeah.
I understand everything that you have to say, but you're missing all of the extra information that I have, and if you just shut up, like,
But
and
in
let
their
me
but
show
in
you,
but in their view, they might think the exact same.
right,
Flipped,
exactly,
right? Yeah.
exactly. Which, yeah, it's super annoying to be on the receiving end of it,
Sure. Sure.
So,
Yeah.
especially like a misdiagnosed version
Yeah.
of the receiving end of it, right? When they think they've got you, pegged, and like they actually, they think you believe this and you don't believe any of that at all, like that's always fun. But
I don't know. I think for me, the strategy has been, because I also find myself feeling the same way or sharing what you just described. I think for me, it's challenging myself to be, just to go back to like roots, like root or things in common, like seeing the good in people, seeing the love in people, like practicing compassion, like trying. And for me, it's like, it's just kind of like, it's going around the issues, or like trying to zoom out. I don't know. Some people get annoyed. I have good friends that get annoyed because it's like, well, what's your worldview? Like, you don't have a worldview. You don't have values. You don't have like things you believe in. And it's like, well, I could see how from a perspective it doesn't look like I do, but I think I do, and here's what they are.
Right.
Like, I value open-mindedness. Like, I value critical thinking. I value this idea that like, I've been learning about this new concept called fallibilism.
Okay.
I'm still trying to wrap my mind around it, frankly, but it's this idea that like you can't prove, like, you don't know what's true. You can't really prove stuff.
Oh, like simulation theory?
I have to look into this again. I've been reading more about it. Don't quote me on it. Here, let me look it up real quick.
Is it like a thing we're trying to figure out what the Russians are doing, and like we don't have the information, so like everything that we assume, that's all it is, it's just assumptions, so it's all fallible? Or are we talking about like this could all be like the Matrix and we don't know?
I think it's I didn't follow word for word what you were saying, but I think you're on the right track, if not already there.
Okay.
It's basically a thesis that says that no belief, so belief is a theory, a view, a thesis, so no belief can ever be rationally supported or justified in a conclusive way. So
including that one.
Including that one, sure. So always there remains a possible doubt as to the truth of the belief. So it's basically, in my mind, it's like a built-in like humility or you don't know-ness about the universe. So that resonates a lot with me.
Yeah.
And I think there's this.
It reminds me a lot of just like the engineer versus the mathematician or something, right? Where like the engineer has to interface with reality, right? And like our assumptions and models are never going to be perfect, right? And so you have to always like be mindful of like, well, where is the model going to break down? Like where, and like always looking for better models, right? Whereas like with math, it can be pure, right? You can just be like, no, we're not dealing with these things. We're only dealing with these things that all break down in the exact way we want them to.
I think that's a really good metaphor. But I think a lot of the things that we're talking about, like when you enter the arena of politics and worldviews and like religions and spirituality, like in my opinion, we should try to get more towards the math or pure, like theoretical, where you have concepts like this, because I think we realize that realities are so subjective.
Yeah.
Right? Like a model that works for you in your reality, like might not work in my reality, and that doesn't mean that it's not a valid model, but it has limitations.
Right.
What's the fine print? for like our worldviews. That's an exercise, right? Like write the fine print for your worldview.
Something about acts of God in there.
About what?
Acts of God.
Yeah.
In the fine print.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's the thing. It's like legal contracts have acts of God. It's like, what?
Yep.
Oh, it's great. Yeah. I come from a background of like loving to debate and like loving to be right, and like, you know, like there's so much conditioning, like especially if you go down this like the science and engineering route of like truth and pursuing truth, and like, you know, and how science is such a good way to do this. And I do still think it is. I think it's amazing.
It is, but there's like a huge difference between somebody who's like continuously or like a community that's continuously and rigorously following the scientific method, like to its conclusion without bias and without, you know, like any economic drivers and everything else.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Like, so.
I totally agree. We're still good. We're at about an hour and 10.
Whoa.
I think we should, because of what happened last time with the recording, I think we should wrap up soon, and then we can do a part 2.
Okay.
If you want.
Yeah, sounds good.
Either today or another day.
Okay.
But man, we covered a bunch. Like,
yeah.
We talked about your journey and kind of how you planned for it and prepared for it. We touched on like Burning Man learnings, like opening up one's mind and perspective, leaving the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
We pretty quickly got into like theories with the unifying theories that you're passionate about, that you've been learning about, which not just serve as an ammo to make you a super interesting guy to talk to, but also like, you know, now is the time, right? Like it's a bit of a renaissance in thought. It's kind of like the good and the bad.
Right.
You know, you get a lot of crazy crap out there, but you get a lot of like interesting people with interesting things to say.
Well, that's the like. I had this idea. I was like trying to imagine building a kingdom or something like that in a fantasy world or something, where it's like maximally fair, right? And so I didn't want a system where like the successful can like hand their wealth down to their kids, because then you get like this concentration of wealth that builds.
Interesting.
Like what I wanted was some kind of like utilitarian, you know, ism, right? But not just that, like a skill based, you know, like expertise centric method of who's in charge of this hierarchy, right? And
maybe let's turn this into a plug. This is tie into the techno
part 2
idea.
Yeah, well, a little bit, but yeah, actually it kind of does, because that is where I was thinking of it.
If you want to hear more about Cole's world,
look at our world, you know, it could
what started off as Cole thinking about his ideal world, but was then brought down to could be our world. I want to get more into the details of that, and if folks are as well, like, let's do a part 2 on that.
Sounds good. But this applies to what you were saying before about this time being special, and it's you know, this being the time, and it's that like technology is ramping up, right? And for people who like are willing to work and learn, you know, like what's on the cutting edge, what's the newest thing, like I'm trying to learn to code myself now. It's not, I'm behind, you know, on the 8 ball on that. But there's like more things to leverage, and you can leverage knowledge and skill in a way that you can't leverage money, right? Like you could take everything away from Elon right now, and he's still going to be like the richest man in the world before he dies, you know? Like he could start over and he's just like, he knows what he's doing. But yeah, I don't know. So
those first principles.
It's the first
and investing in oneself, to your point, like
right. It's the skills and how valuable, you know, they are, especially in this, especially when everything's brand new, especially like before the rule books get written. Yeah, it's
well,
like
you can write the rule books.
Yeah, somebody needs to do that, like, because otherwise you end up with like Facebook and shit. So, yeah, I don't know.
Alrighty.
Good chat.
Absolutely, man. Until part 2.
Until part 2.